We're gonna get started, and I think these are, has anyone been to a startup grind before?
I have not.
Awesome, okay. So this is presented in partnership with Google for Entrepreneurs. So basically the impetus behind it is if we could get an influencer or entrepreneur or investor in the room and have a casual fireside chat with them, you end up learning a lot more than just a presentation with a PowerPoint. So the nature of these discussions is to be extremely casual, and please feel free to ask questions at the end. So it'll be like a 20-30 minute fireside chat with me and Hugh, and then at the end you guys ask questions, and we highly encourage you to do that and to share what you're hearing on social media, and our hashtag is FullSteamAR. So this is the Conductors event. The Conductors is a partnership with UCA and Startup Junkie Consulting in Fayetteville. We launched November 2016 to start the entrepreneurial community in Conway and the surrounding areas. So a little bit of background, but we are going to hear from Hugh tonight. Hugh is the retired president and CEO of Entergy Arkansas. He's a past board member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, he's on a number of boards, or has been on a number of boards, the current chairman of the Arkansas Career Education and Workforce Development Board, and currently the vice chair of the Nature Conservancy.
Yes.
Of the Nature Conservancy of Arkansas, and is a volunteer for the Our Kids Read program. So Hugh, we're going to get started. Can you just tell us about yourself? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
Grew up in pretty much most of my growing up years was Fargo, North Dakota. You've all seen the movie Fargo, so that's where I grew up. Met my wife there in high school, and went to school at the university, or North Dakota State University, the Bison. That's the everybody knows about the Bison, and Carson Wentz came from North Dakota State, so I have to put a plug in there. And graduated from there in 1980. I don't know how far you want me to go.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Just keep going. Finished in 1980. Went to work for an engineering firm in Kansas City for a couple of years, and in 1982 I came to New Orleans. Worked for a company called Middle South Services, which is actually a service company of the current Entergy Corporation, and I stayed with Entergy for the next 34 years in multiple locations in Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, and the last 16 here in Arkansas.
So talk about your career trajectory through Entergy. How did you become the CEO?
A lot of luck. I would say, my degree was in construction management, so I always felt like when I was going to school, I wanted to build things, build buildings and build stuff. And I wound up in the power industry, so I wanted to build a power plant. And that's the reason I came to Entergy in Louisiana, was to build a coal fire facility. That ultimately never got built, so we were actually building a nuclear plant at the same time outside of New Orleans. And so I got my project management, construction type experience there on site, worked there, and just had different opportunities. Got noticed by, or got an opportunity to interview with then CEO of Louisiana Power and Light and New Orleans Public Service as an executive assistant. Back when CEOs had executive assistants, they were sort of 2-year growth opportunities for young professionals, and spent 2 years in that spot and got a good perspective of the company and how the company operated, and then had different positions, whether it was in operations or finance, customer service, regulatory, and ultimately the CEO job here. So I had a lot of different experiences within the industry, within the company, and also in different locations. And so you could understand the different cultures of the organization in Mississippi versus Texas, and the regulation, because we're a highly regulated business, and the regulation, there are differences between one state versus the other, one jurisdiction versus the other. So had some good mentors along the way as well. Took some risks. You always, every job, I took, you never knew what was on the back end of it. Because there's never a guarantee of, well, if you take this job, you're going to go, in 3 years, you're going to be moved to another position higher in the company. It was never any, there was never any sort of agreement like that. It was, we got a job for you in Macomb, Mississippi. The merger is done. We want you to be a division manager, and we want you to move there next March.
Can you elaborate on that? Because
Yeah.
you moved a lot, and I mean, it seems like, at least from your resume, and you were married at the time, weren't you?
Yep,
So
yep.
what was your thought process of, I'm in New Orleans and this job in Mississippi or whatever is available, and what was your calculation for taking that, and did that risk pay off?
Well, yeah, I have to say that they all paid off because it turned out okay. But there was thank God I had a understanding wife. We came to the South believing that we were only going to be living here about 4 or 5 years. Those of you guys that have gone through college, I remember this like it was yesterday. And there's a lesson here, I guess, for all of us. But the placement questionnaires, about when you're a junior, you start filling out these questionnaires, and they ask you, where do you want to live? Where would you most like to live? Where would you least like to live? Well, I always wanted to move to the Rocky Mountain region or the West Coast. That's where we wanted to go. And I remember like it was yesterday, checking the box where you would least like to live was the southeastern United States. And so Kansas City was the first move coming out of college, and that was in the height of the recession. And so there was a utility that was going to build a power plant. I wanted to get field experience. So I said, well, let's go to New Orleans. We didn't have any kids at the time. And we thought it was going to be a fun life experience, 4 or 5 years, build a power plant, and then move west. Well, 34 years later, 3 kids later, 4 different moves, same company. Here we are. We're still in the South. Our kids were born in the South. They couldn't imagine, living anywhere else.
So you consider yourself a risk taker?
Yeah, a calculated risk taker, sure.
So why do you think, because you were promoted a lot, especially when you started as the executive assistant?
No, I started as a planner scheduler at a nuclear power plant.
So why do you think that you were plugged for these other jobs and promoted throughout the company?
I'd like to say that, they saw some great leader in me, but I was so young. 23, 24 years old. I made it known to the organization that I wanted to get different experiences and I wanted to move around. And so, not all employees do that, which I've come to understand, come to realize. And so when you see an employee who takes initiative, takes some personal risk, does things for the company that maybe another employee wouldn't do, people notice that, leaders notice that, and I did it a number of times, and it turned, like I said, it turned out okay.
So do you recommend, and I watched an interview with you today, so I know you do you recommend people within a company to voice their opinion when they want to move up within the company?
Absolutely.
You don't think that could backfire at all?
Well, you have to, if you're so focused on promoting yourself, that backfires. Mm-hmm. But letting people know that you want other experiences, you like to move in the organization, but while you're in that job, do the best you can in that job. That was always my philosophy, and none of these jobs that I got, raising my hand looking for. They came to me. So I do think, and I've seen it backfire on some that are just too focused on, I want to get promoted, I want to be a vice president. and if that's all you're focused on, that's a problem.
So
There's a certain amount of, you got to get some scar tissue along the way. And the different experiences you have in the organization, getting exposed to different people in the organization and going, rarely does somebody come up straight from engineering all the way up to a CEO or finance. You want to get people to have different experiences, so they have a much broader perspective of things.
So I was reading I was reading an article about you earlier today, and you were talking about sort of creating talent within the organization, or at least helping to breed that talent. So I mean, can you talk a little bit about your leadership style and how you make people better who work for you?
Oh boy. Well, I've always felt that a leader shouldn't expect others to do something you wouldn't do yourself. Lead by example. Everybody's heard that before. And I worked a lot. My wife might say I was a workaholic. My kids might say that, and so I missed some time with kids growing up, and some of that I regret. So there's certainly trade-offs at the CEO level, because it is a all-consuming job. But what I expected from employees what I expected from my team is, number one, try to hire the best people out there, and people that are smarter than you, and set clear direction on where you want to go, and get out of the way. Be there to support them, be there to remove barriers, help them with issues within the organization and outside the organization. But I found if you hire the best people you can and they work together as a team, you can get amazing things done, get amazing results. I've also seen it when there are individuals on the team that aren't necessarily team players and are more focused on themselves, and it becomes a real problem. So, hire great people, set clear goals and expectations, set high expectations, push, but let them do their work. You don't be looking over their shoulder all the time, and because you've hired them to do that job, and hold them accountable to do so.
So I have a couple more questions about the personnel side of being a CEO, but before, I also want to talk about just the business side and what that looked like for you. So can you talk about, and I have a number of questions here, but can you talk about what a typical day was, like what were your actual duties as CEO of Entergy?
Well, if it was an ice storm, it was showing up at a press conference, explaining the situation to the public, to customers, to our regulators. John Bethel used to be a regulator for us. Typical day, lots and lots of meetings, because people, when there are issues, when there are projects, they bring questions, they bring issues to you to solve. Alternative A, B, or C, what do you think? And you discuss it with your team or whoever's bringing that to you. So lots of meetings, lots of interface with employees. I tried to, at least early in my tenure, I tried to spend a lot of time with employees. That gets hard the more other issues stack up, especially when you got employees scattered around all over the state. Try to spend time with customers, large customers, small customers, and the community. I was involved quite a bit with community-related activities as well. Chamber of Commerce, Little Rock Chamber, 50 for the Future, state chamber activities as well.
So how would your day change if there was a big storm or a natural disaster?
Well, that's one thing that Entergy and all utilities do this. We all prepare for it. That when the bad storm is going to hit, whether it's an ice storm or hurricane, everybody has a storm role. And somebody who is in resource planning today, on a normal day, on a storm, they may be running logistics, or they may be running a staging area in West Memphis, Arkansas, bringing where we've got materials and equipment and people from other companies coming in. So everybody's got their role in an ice storm or a hurricane. Myself, my role would be mostly public, and I tried to spend a lot of time out in the field with employees at that time, staying out of their way. Number one.
So I was reading something, and you were talking about the heroism of your employees in these big storms. And,
Yeah.
And I was also thinking too that we talk a lot about entrepreneurship. So obviously entrepreneurship would be starting your own company, and entrepreneurship would be how can you be innovative within a big company, which is really, really important as well. And I was thinking that was probably a big deal in Entergy, especially in these big storms, because you have to think of solutions really, really quickly. And could you give an example of a type of situation like that where you or one of your employees had to pivot quickly and think of a solution?
Oh gosh. You mean in a storm situation? Mm-hmm. Well, there's the typical distribution damage. That's when a wooden pole falls over. Getting those replaced are pretty, I don't want to say basic because I don't know how to do it, and I wouldn't do it. I'd probably kill myself if I did do it. But large transmission lines, for example, when those things go down and they cause, lights to go out over entire regions, bringing in resources that are needed, whether that's obviously people, but helicopters, for example, to get the towers raised quicker, built quicker. That's sort of in our normal routine. I really can't think of anything off the top of my head that was innovative, because we've seen so much of it over the years. Every wood pole that collapses now on the transmission system is replaced with steel. We try to do that in storm situations as well. So I don't want to say it's routine, but it's pretty intense. It's 24-hour preparation and planning. It's not 24-hour around the clock rebuilding. We'll get the people out there. People have to have an opportunity to rest themselves, so they'll go from daylight to sundown.
So what about your experience problem solving just as a CEO in any capacity? And could you also talk about maybe something that might have been perceived as a failure, even if it was just to you, and how you dealt with that?
Well, I could probably say there's lots of failures. A lot of the challenges that we had, and John probably knows where I'm headed with this one, in the regulatory arena, because having the right regulatory framework is really, really important. And the company, all of Entergy, including Entergy Arkansas and its sister companies, Entergy Mississippi, Entergy Louisiana, Texas, and the city of New Orleans, were, over a period of 30 years, had been embroiled in litigation associated with most of it coming from an outside attorney that was hired by the regulator in Louisiana. And he was very successful over the years of litigating matters of the company at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington that would have the effect of lowering costs for customers in Louisiana, but increasing costs for customers in Arkansas. And it was just, if you were sitting in my shoes, it was hell for a good number of years trying to weave through that litigation. Now, some of my predecessors, most of you are too young to remember Grand Gulf, but it was a nuclear plant in Mississippi. One of my predecessors had to deal with similar issues associated with solving that litigation by the same Louisiana attorney. And I'm happy to say that that's one thing I can say under my tenure. There is no more of that litigation risk to the Arkansas customers. Long story, but it was probably one of the most challenging things I was involved in over that period of time of getting out of that contract that really enabled that litigation and getting into a new type of planning arrangement and operating arrangement with a third-party entity called MISO.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So talk about your work, or how this work intersected with poverty in Arkansas, poverty alleviation, and what work did you do with that?
We had the previous CEO of the parent company is named Wayne Leonard. He had a passion for trying to make an impact on our low-income customers. And whether you're in Louisiana, Mississippi, or Arkansas, about 25% of our customers in Arkansas, for example, live at or below the federal poverty level. And from a business perspective, we're in the business to sell electricity. And when your 25% of your population has a hard time paying the light bill, they have a hard time getting out of poverty. That's not good for our business long term. Obviously, that's not good for them. It's not good for the communities they live in. So, as one of the larger employers, how can we try to make a difference in terms of helping our low-income customers get out of poverty, whether it's through better education, whether it's through promoting earned income tax credit, whether it's low-income weatherization of their homes. We looked for any and all ways, lobbied Washington to change the LIHEAP formula that would bring more dollars to the southern states compared to the northern states. Lobbied Washington just to have more LIHEAP dollars allocated out of the federal budget. So we looked at all ways we could provide influence and try to be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem.
Did any of those move the needle?
Individually, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Have the numbers changed? I think the numbers are still probably in the 20-25% range, certainly here in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a constant challenge, but education is core to all that.
So that's exactly where I was going.
Okay.
So as you guys know, Sharice was our speaker for our last Startup Run. She's the director of the Department of Career Education, and you are the chairman of her board. So can we just talk a little bit about career education? What is it, and why is this important to you? Well,
I say it's important to me because, again, going back to the poverty question we talked about earlier, it's all tied into that. There was a time in this country, maybe the last 20, 30 years where the mantra was everybody has to go to college. And, that sounds good, but that's not the right answer. And if you look at the jobs, I was looking at a report just a couple days ago, in the South, about 55% of all the jobs are what do they call them? There's higher ed, about 35% of the jobs require higher education degree, 4-year degree. About 15% are low wage, no degree high school. Everything in the middle is some kind of training that's required post-secondary, but you don't need a 4-year education. And, you know, so much of our education, higher education talk the past 30 years has been that top 30%. And we've, I don't want to say we've ignored, but we haven't placed the priority like we should on that mid-level where there's post-secondary education requirements. Tech schools, career tech, VOTech was the word, you know, for many, many years. And I think that's fallen out of favor. Now we use career tech, career education. You know, you're seeing now at the national level, certainly at the state level, states all over the country are getting more focused on career tech ed because manufacturing jobs are coming back. You know, we also have an aging workforce. We've got the best job market today than we've had in decades, and so many of those jobs are needed in factories, advanced manufacturing, for example. And the factories today are not like the factories that, you know, my parents talked about when I was growing up. You know, they were dirty and you know, just tough places to work. I mean, they're not like that today. They're clean, they're professional, and you need more training to be able to perform those jobs. So it's really, really important. And if we can get our high schools and our K through 12 to focus on career ed just as much as we get them to focus on higher ed, a lot of those kids that are dropping out can get $50,000 jobs today.
So, and I mentioned this last time, but I just finished the Leadership Arkansas program through the state chamber, and we toured like a ton of these plants, and they are extremely clean and high tech and really, really impressive. And thank you. And I know you can start, I think at Newport, like the crane operator starts at like $80,000.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking if people just knew this, they would, I think these would be sought after jobs, but there's such a stigma around these jobs, and it's such a huge issue. But what do you think, I mean, what will change that, just the mindset, and that it's an option at all outside of after high school?
Yeah, I mean, just constant communication. You know, we have the debate at the Career Ed Board, cosmetology, for example. A lot of women love to go to cosmetology school because it's familiar, it's something they know, they like to do that. But running a CNC machine or robotics machine is something they don't have any exposure to. So, and there's no reason why they can run. I mean, they can run robotics just as good, probably better than most men. But we've got to get those kids exposed when they're in high school, you know, 8th and 9th grade, that there are opportunities making a tremendous living working in factories, men and women.
So, and we were talking last time about what the exact number is of these unfilled jobs in Arkansas, but tens of thousands, definitely.
I think the last number I heard was around 30,000.
So what is going to happen if we can't figure out a way to fill these jobs?
Well, they'll go elsewhere. You know, the businesses will find places to expand somewhere else. That's the challenge.
And
now, other states, there's a lot of states just like Arkansas, but we've got to get our strategy in place and get financial incentives right where our two-year colleges and our high schools see this and show our kids that it's a real opportunity for them, for their future.
So, and another topic, and we talked about this again, I don't want to be too redundant of our last conversation, but I'm really intrigued about the soft skills problem. And when we toured a lot of these facilities with Leadership Arkansas, so many people were like, oh, well, we can get qualified kids, but they don't have any soft skills, or they lack intrapersonal skills, and they end up leaving, and we have a high turnover and all this stuff. And what are your opinions about that in general? Is that something that you saw as a CEO that was a problem?
I didn't see that as much in our business, but I've heard that from other businesses for years. The soft skills are just hugely important. What Woody Allen said, 80% is showing up on time. You know, there's a lot of truth to that. Showing up on time and doing it routinely.
Well, why do you think that that's a problem now? Or do you think it's always been a problem?
No, it hasn't been a problem. I don't think it's always been a problem. I just don't know why why it should be such a problem, or why it is such a problem today. You know, family structure is obviously part of the issue. I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I know that there is lots of effort, lots of work in teaching kids in high school kind of the proper do's and don'ts of working, being in a work environment, what that means, showing up on time, shaking hands, being able to communicate with your coworker.
So I have one more question about career ed, and then a question about your leadership philosophy, and then I'll open it up to you guys. But talk about, obviously, as a board chairman, you are very invested in this board, and so what is your vision for it, and what do you want? What would be like if this happened? I feel successful on this board.
Well, we did something today. I can't really talk about, but we're trying to change on one part of funding, for example, to secondary centers. We're trying to change the funding to drive these secondary centers to put the highest priority on those occupations that are in high demand today. The funding formula historically has not made any differentiation between cosmetology, and I don't want to pick on cosmetology, but it's just a good example. But there was no differentiation in the funding to support a cosmetology class versus a welding class or a advanced manufacturing class. In other words, the same dollars went to both. And we want to change the dynamic where instead of having higher ed or secondary centers or two-year colleges just focusing on getting a butt in the seat and getting the funding associated with that, but getting the right butt in the right seat, so we can have kids coming out of high school, or while they're still in high school, getting exposed to real life careers where they're going to go out and make $30, $40, $50, $60, $70,000 a year in 2 years or less. And we're doing something right now to change, or trying to do something. It'll be up to the legislature ultimately to change the funding formula to put those incentives where that will happen. Okay.
Wow. So, and I have one more question on this. I know I said we were going to move on, but Sharice and I were talking about this earlier.
Sharice, correct me if I'm wrong. Right? That's right. We're trying to do that. Yeah.
So we were talking about the percentage of students in Arkansas who can't read at grade level, and obviously, if you don't have that, if we have really underperforming students in that category, then all this stuff it's hard to even achieve any of it. So I mean, what are your thoughts on that number, and how do you think we can change that?
A lot smarter people than me are working a lot more than I am on that particular topic. You know, having our kids be able to read by the time they're, read at grade level by 4th or 5th grade is so important, because at that point in time, you know, if you can read, you can solve all kinds of problems. If you can't read, then you're behind the 8 ball for the rest of your schooling. If you do finish, you know, would encourage all of us to, you know, tutor kids. My wife and I tutor some 3rd graders. Have done it the last 2 years. Going to do it again this year. How much of a difference that makes, I don't know. I certainly get a lot of satisfaction out of it, and I hope the kids get satisfaction out of it. The needle, however, in the Little Rock School District right now is not moving in terms of reading. So more time reading, getting the kids engaged in wanting to read. I am not the expert at that, and I know there are many professionals that are trying to solve that problem, but it's really important that we get it fixed.
Okay, so I have one more question, and I'm going to open it up. You talked about this a little bit earlier, but your work-life balance as a CEO and ambitious employee. How did you balance everything, and what advice do you have in that regard?
Have a understanding wife. Spouse was important, certainly. She followed me and was a major caregiver for our 3 kids for many of those years. And a lot of those jobs I would have to go, you know, 3 to 6 months in advance. The job up here, I came a year in advance, and then they came up after that. You know, I may not be the best person to give you advice on work-life balance. At the CEO level, it's just tough. But you know, at the end of the day, it's your family that is most important, and you can't be so bad at your work-life balance that you break your family, obviously. I've been lucky, you know, my wife and I are still married. Our kids are, 2 are here in Arkansas, one's in Texas, close by. I think we still have good relationship between us, but amongst us. But you know, at the CEO level, I'll admit it's tough, because it's, you know, it's a 24/7 type deal.
So I know this is a hard question to answer, but looking back, would you do anything differently if you could at this point?
You know, like I said earlier, it's turned out okay. Our kids are doing okay. They're doing good, in fact. You know, there was the time that I moved up here. You know, was the senior year of my son's high school. You know, should I have done that? I think about that often, and whether or not would his life be different. But you know, we made the decision, and we did it as a family, and that's why I came up by myself and commuted weekly back and forth when he was still in Louisiana.
To New Orleans?
To Mandeville, which is right north of New Orleans. Yeah.
And was his senior year was when you were named CEO of Entergy?
Right. So I mean, it was tough. It was tough on all of us.
I mean, do you have any, and the reason I'm asking is because I know this is a problem, or a challenge a lot of people face, is making really hard life decisions, and it's nice to hear from someone who made it all the way to CEO. And I mean, what advice do you have for people who are facing decisions like that could potentially change your entire life?
Well, I mean, making the decision and coming to Arkansas changed my life, changed all of our lives, you know, for the better. There were bumps along the way. I don't want to discount that it was easy. It was, you know, it was tough for my middle child, oldest daughter as well. She came up as a sophomore, and it took her 2 high schools to kind of get situated. And she gives me kind of a dirty look, but every now and then. But she'll also say it was the best thing for her because it made her stronger. She had some adversity through that process, and I think that helped her in terms of where she ultimately went to college.
So just trust your gut in that situation?
You know, it's a family decision.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, you got to trust yourself. Depending on the job, where it's going to, you know, if it's a CEO job, you know, it's going to be a commitment for sure. I mean, all the jobs are a commitment. I don't want to say that they're not, but you know, make it a family decision, because if there's big disagreements and you make the move, that can't turn out well. I can't imagine that turning out well. So luckily for us, it was okay. And I think it's more difficult for women, frankly. Women who also have children. I know that, and I may be stepping in things that I don't know much about, but I just do think there's more pressure on women who have kids in balancing the kids and the CEO roles. I mean, there was an article, I think this week, why are so many women CEOs retiring early? And you know, there really wasn't an answer, but there is certainly a recognition that raising kids and women is different than men in raising kids. So, and then you add the CEO responsibilities on top of that. For women, I just think it's tougher.
Interesting. Well, I mean, and I went down that rabbit hole partly because I watched a really interesting video last night of these 80, 90-year-old women giving advice to young professional women basically along those lines, and it was really interesting. Their advice looking back being like, yeah, just relax a lot more in life, and it's like, really, it's just an interesting.
It's easy to say that when you're retired. I mean, I understand.
See, that's the thing, because that's why I'm asking if you could do it again, would you do it again?
I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Okay, well, I'll turn it up to you guys now. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question for you. Bear with me, this might be a multi-part question. So you're making the move to Arkansas, and you were going to ascend to the CEO role. Do you have a vision or a single thing that you wanted to focus on? Or even perhaps, did you think, I want to leave a legacy? And when I leave this role, they're going to say that Hugh McDonald did this.
Yeah, I think when I was 41 when I got the job, 41, 42, something like that. And, you know, I don't think before I started I said I want to leave, this is the legacy I want to leave. But if you're there long enough, obviously you want to leave something behind, and hopefully it's better than it was when you got there. And in my case, you know, I guess probably the legacy is that complicated contract that I talked about earlier. It's called the system agreement, and it's just got bad connotations to it if you're internal to the company and even if you're a regulator. You know, we had operated under that contract for 60 years. And I was the guy that signed the letter that said Entergy Arkansas was leaving. And we're giving our notice, formal notice per the contract, we're getting out. That notice period is 8 years long. So there was like an 8-year period of litigation on and off, and really the last, 4 or 5 years were probably the worst of getting out of that contract, and not only getting out of it, but getting out of it and not exposing your customers to more risk. But where are you going to go once you get out of that operating scheme? You had to get to a different operating scheme, which is where the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO, came to play. So I don't know if that was the biggest deal. Changing our generation portfolio was a pretty big deal when I was there as well. Modernizing a lot of our generation, adding some solar. Those were probably the biggest deals.
Good deal. And so now that you're retired and you're involved in other boards and other activities, when you choose something, do you have an impact in mind? This is kind of carrying over from leaving a legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I want to be involved in things where I can't make a difference. At the end of the day, I think that's what we all want to do. The jobs we have, whether you're a CEO or not, you want to make a difference. So, and it just depends on what position you're in, how big of a difference that can be. So, I think that's what's exciting about careers and work, and obviously from a work perspective, but the biggest difference is your family. Have I raised a family? Have I been able to maintain my marriage through the whole process and keep us all together?
Hugh, that's a good point, especially for entrepreneurs and younger people starting out. At least initially, you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
You need to be able to provide, a job that's meaningful for you. But then, if you have a family, you got to make sure you're covering the family. And then, then you focus to make sure that you're adding value to your job, so that you can continue to add value to the family. I always kind of check back, am I covering the bases? Am I taking care of home first, and then focus on the job?
That's right. Other questions?
So you mentioned that you've worked a little bit with solar panels. I'm just curious on your thoughts on the renewable energy market, and if you think that's a way things are moving, and also kind of like, I don't know, I feel like there's sort of this movement of people like going off the grid and they have their own little energy fortress in the middle of the woods somewhere. I'm curious to see if you think those things can you really do that? Is it a feasible way to like run your home with electricity? And then also just, where do you think the market's going in that regard?
Yeah, you can do that today. It's not going to be as cheap as Conway Corp or as Entergy can provide electricity to you today. But when I was still working at Entergy, we did our first solar deal, which I think went online in June of this year. 81 megawatts. It'll operate provide electricity to about 13,000 homes, something like that. So it's the biggest solar deal in Arkansas, and we're doing another one. I shouldn't say we, but Entergy's doing another one in Lake Village, and which is a little bit bigger than that. And we did those because they were economic compared to the next lowest cost generator. So anytime a utility, this is me talking, if I had to spend $500 million, or Entergy had to spend $500 million on a new generator, I had to look at, well, would that be nuclear, would that be coal, would that be natural gas, or would that be renewable, solar or wind? Those are basically the 5 conventional choices you have. Nuclear is really not an option anymore. It's just too high cost to build. Coal is not an option. In fact, we've made a decision to actually shut down our White Bluff plants at the end of next decade. Natural gas is really the go-to fuel today, but when you stacked up the production tax credit, it was PTC, associated with solar, that was over the 30-year or 20-year purchase power agreement life. That was the most economic choice for our customers. And I would have to bring it to people like John, and John would look at they would evaluate it as well to see whether or not they agreed or disagreed with our numbers. And you agreed with that one. So now that's utility scale solar. You know, you're not going to go out and add 500-acre solar farm. You know, you get a, you know, the old quantity discount. You can also put a solar panel on your house, but you're not going to get a 2.5 cent a kilowatt hour price coming out of that solar panel on your house. Someday, when the economics of a solar panel and storage, like battery storage, when that day happens, you know, it'll be a tough day for the Entergys of the world, the utilities that provide that service to residential customers. I think that's a ways off yet. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned, you were asked about taking risks and calculating risk, and I was just curious to know a little bit about maybe that process for you. Some of your, like, what did it look like to calculate? Like, at what point do you do research and make decisions? At what point do you finally decide, all right, we're just going to pull the trigger and do this? And maybe what did that process look like for you? Yeah.
Well, you know, I'd always wanted to have, if I'm making a decision, you got to have multiple alternatives. And each alternative has got pros and cons around each, probabilities around each alternative. And to the extent you can actually put a probability to look at, you know, the risk associated with what the probability distribution of a bad outcome or all the outcomes would be, and do everything you can to avoid the really, really expensive tail risk. I mean, that's what you really have to avoid, those risks. But a lot of the you know, decisions are made, you know, based on just sort of a pro and con analysis of, and you know, you do it. That's another way of saying risk assessment. And you know, you risk assess, because at the end of the day, most CEOs are trying to manage risk in one form or another. And so, like I said, you know, there's risk to everything, but there are calculated risks that you take that you want to make sure you try to hedge your risk as much as possible. Risk to the company, risk to customers, risk to employees as well. It all depends on the issue.
One more about leadership. Do you believe you had natural leadership skills, or were you a student of leadership? And if you were a student of leadership, which leader did you follow the most?
I don't know if I would say I'd have natural leadership skills. I will tell you though, what Entergy does and what they did 25 years ago, they would have career profiles or career objectives. And I remember filling out one of those career objectives probably when it was 1986, 5, 87, sometime around there. And they said, what do you aspire to be? And I remember writing, I said, I aspire to be a CEO. Could I do it? I don't know. Could I take a shot at it? You know, that if I failed to be CEO and you know, became number 2, you know, I figured that was a good thing to, or a good risk. I had the opportunity, so I guess I wanted to try. I always wanted to try. I guess I felt I had some of the common sense skills, leadership skills, people skills to be able to give it a shot or to be in the mix. but I was also exposed to that executive assistant role that I had. The CEO that I worked for was just like, almost like a father to me, and I was able to watch his leadership style, and I always kind of think of him as maybe the model that I tried to follow in my career.
All right. But no specific author or any program or book?
No, really. I mean, there's so many, you know, you can read, and they all make sense pretty much. But I found that so much of it is, you know, treat people like you expect to be treated. You know, being able to communicate with people. Be nice. You know, listen to people, what they have to say. And maybe most importantly, try to gain their trust. Because if you don't have their trust, the organization doesn't trust you, you know, you can't do anything, really. So, and you know, that's all common sense, frankly. And you don't need a whole lot of leadership books to tell you that. A lot of it is training and having that experience and falling down and failing and learning that way. I've learned a lot by some failures. Probably learned more about myself and handling issues not as well as I should have. So the next time that came around, or just try to prevent that from ever happening in the future. School of Hard Knocks.
Okay, so to wrap it up, what is one piece of business advice you would leave us with?
Oh,
I didn't warn him about it. I'm sorry. Sharice knew because she watched it.
man.
You watched another one.
Piece of business advice. You know, it sounds pretty trite, but you know, work hard, be honest with yourself, be honest with those around you. Try to find somebody in the organization that you can learn from, that may take you under your wing, mentor you a little bit, but also, you know, take some risks as well. You know, if you never take any risks, or if you never make if people said, well, I've finished my career and I never had a major screw up, I would say, well, maybe you weren't pushing the envelope hard enough. And hopefully you've got people around you that when you do make a mistake, they're going to say, okay, let's learn by that and not repeat it, but they keep you around. I was lucky where, you know, I wasn't fired a couple times with some mistakes that I made. But, you know, life is short too. Man, I can't believe that I'm retired now. And live your life while you're also working too. It goes by in a hurry.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Hugh. You have an amazing legacy, and it was really cool reading all about your history and hearing your story tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it. Thank you.
It will be on the Conductor's website. If you guys want to watch it or share it, it'll be up probably in a couple of weeks. We have another Startup Grind August 22nd with the president of UCA, same time in here. And where's Keaton? August 16th for Glenn? 29th. Glenn Crockett, the CEO of Dave Creek Media, is going to share his story of how he started his company over lunch, and this is all on our website. So we invite you guys to come back, and thank you for coming, and thanks again, Hugh.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Kim.